Hello there and a very good morning. This is Newsline. I'm Sonali Wanigapaduke. Our guest this morning is a civil rights activist. He was also a former chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Chandra Jayaratne. Thank you so much for joining us on this edition of Newsline. Mr. Jayaratne, the National Audit Bill is still being delayed. So many years, almost 3 years after the government came in. The constitutional reform process is still being delayed. Has the coalition government really got its act together?
Well, answering the last, coalition government has obviously not got its act together because the leadership and delivery of a team working together with one purpose, one objective, trying to realize those objectives within agreed value systems and within agreed strategic action doesn't appear to be in place. And I think that's the fundamental fault of this government. A coalition government, like when two companies merge together, requires them to agree on what's their vision, what's the set of values that they will not break under any circumstances. Like, for instance, collective cabinet responsibility is one of those that they should have agreed and never allowed somebody to go over. You can debate within the cabinet, but once decided, that's collective responsibility of everybody to keep up and support it. For instance, what are the minimum set of objectives that each of the parties want? Agree that minimum on which there should be no debate. If you say that the country's finances are so bad that we need to raise money on selling some property, okay, until such time as we do not face a financial calamity, we will do this. And for that, we will have a set of priorities upon which it's these sectors that we will privatize, or it is these sectors in which land alienations will happen. Now, if such a set of policies are not determined, let's take from the Strategic Development Act was taken by the others. Then this government had a development policy. Megapolis was supposed to come in January 2015. They promised it. January 2016, it will be on record. We have not seen that document still. So this is a government that has lost its way, not because they don't have the intent. Intent is what they have clearly stated in the election manifesto. But leadership has been unable to get the act together to implement it in a way that should have been implemented, like running a business.
Right. Mr. Jayaratne, let's talk about some of the pending matters that the government needs to really focus on. The constitutional reform process, we saw a steering committee being appointed. We saw a public representations committee which went across the island taking down public opinion. And right now we have before us 6 subcommittee reports that have been compiled. However, there is no interim document as the new constitution. So can we really be satisfied?
Yeah, these documents, what you're talking of, in addition there was the public response to a very positive move. All 225 MPs signed and agreed that the constitution, that was done in 2015 itself, when they said they formed the Constitutional Assembly to process this. Now, these reports that you're talking on, the 6 reports, have been out for the last one, 6 months at least. It was November last year when it was completed. Now, there's been no discussion on these, or on the very critical ones which are not covered by this, like the electoral reforms.
Sure.
Public are totally disillusioned with the legislators who have gone into parliament, or to other legislatures like the provincial councils.
Right.
Their integrity, their capabilities and their commitment to Sri Lanka first have not been demonstrated. Now, in that context, electoral reforms should have been a very public opinion on which people's needs to put representatives. I've seen some very good coverage on your corruption, free against corruption, whatever the program that you're running every day.
Yes.
What the people are saying. They are disillusioned with the people who have gone. They want them to perform. They want them, if they don't perform, or if they perform in an illegal or unacceptable way, there must be a way for the people to be dealt with. Now, the power of recall. Should an MP be elected? If he engages in any activity of moral turpitude, should he be recalled? Now, these are issues on which public have made certain recommendations in the report. Now, this is a very critical area which has not been touched on. The behaviors of these people, once elected, should codes of conduct, they were amongst them. And public officials, how do we hold public officials responsible when these elected people give them instructions and make them subordinate to a task that we cannot hold from the public servants responsible and accountable for the day-to-day performance.
Mr. Jayaratna, you're also part of the Friday Forum, which is a group of individuals concerned Sri Lankans, really. And in a recent release, you say the powers of the ministers must be limited to policy making and implementation of policies must be left to professional public servants. Do you think our public servants are professional? Do you think the public service
Our public service has been professional, and if it has been made political and politicized, it has happened since 1972. Prior to 1972 Constitution, the section about secretaries said the ministers shall have power to make policy directions. Now they can tell what direction they are going. But in the 72 Constitution, Mr. Felix Das Bandaranaike and his team amended it to read as the secretaries of ministries, who are the chief accounting officers, were made to become under the direction, oversight and control of a minister. And the ministers were also by this constitution given rights to transfer, recruitment, transfers and disciplinary action against public officials were also given to the minister. The secretaries, election of secretaries were made at the whims and fancies, of course, by the president, but by taking away the Public Service Commission, the independent body's activity stops at levels below director. Beyond the director, it is the politicians who does the selection. Now, these three factors of taking away the independence, accountability and professionality of the public servants has been the main cause. Let us take, for instance, what is reported in the media, the Ging Nilwala project. 2 days before the elections, on the 5th and 7th, the newspapers say 4 billion rupees was transferred as 5% advance payment on a project which had not even been in the budget of for the year. Now, how did the professional public servants approve 2 days before an election the transfer of public funds of nearly 5 billion rupees to be remitted out of this country in 2 installments, as it stated, without following the rules? Now, the Constitution clearly says no public finances can be allocated without the approval of the legislature. Now, these public officials would have been directed by somebody to do it. Now, that power of direction should be taken away, restore the accountability and the responsibilities and the abilities of the professional abilities, strengthen the capabilities of the public service and hold them to account. For surcharge them. Now, the surcharge provisions of the National Audit Bill is the one that is stopping the National Audit Bill from going forward. Now, certainly the public servants have a grouse. If they are directed to do something wrong by their superiors, how can they be responsible for a surcharge? So we have to restore their position to pre-72 level and impose surcharge if we want proper outlay of public finance and a control over corruption.
Mr. Jayaratna, a common question that we have is, it's really difficult to bring matters of national significance, national importance into the public foray. For example, this process of constitutional reform, this process of the National Audit Bill. When we try to start conversations with people in general about these topics of national significance, what they say is, oh, this is not relevant to us. But that's not true, is it? So how do we really make these conversations attractive?
Well, I think you are being unfair by your own self and your institution, because your institution has done some wonderful work in this correction.
Absolutely, but I'm talking about the masses. I'm talking about...
Even the masses, what you do with your government, the program, followed up by the anti-corruption program now, you have taken some of the... If you listen to some of them who are talking in your program, you have been interviewed on your program every night, they seem to know more about the bond scam than the ministers in this cabinet does. They are aware of that, how the leakage takes place. When public funds are voted, that it doesn't come, they know the leakage. They also know that people come, make promises and do not deliver. But what they do not realize is that their poverty is due to their positions in life and their livelihoods and their lifestyle is a resultant of the bad governance that has been there. Yes, I agree to that extent. Recently there is a video from the Indian government has done, or somebody in India has done, which shows that from 1930s, the big scams of India, and they show the trillions of dollars of or crores of dollars that have been lost due to about 25 scams they are repeating. And then they say, had those scams not happened, there will be no poverty in India, people would have all had jobs, and they would have been number 2 position in the world of growth and economy. So these are matters, I think, on which further communications is necessary. But above all, there must be leadership commitment. I think to me what is lacking is leadership commitment by those who are elected. Once elected, they really want to do exactly the same as... I'll give you one example. We saw it in the newspapers about the same time as the Sri Lankan report was assigned, or just after that, I think. A committee was appointed to look into the affairs of the port, operations of the port. Now we saw a report being handed in by the members of that committee. Now till today, we haven't heard anything about it. A minister who took charge of this, whether he presented it in cabinet, whether cabinet reviewed it, whether anybody else reviewed it, whether this famous CCEM or the economic committee reviewed it and took some action, we do not know. So I think public has to hold people to account, and the media has a great role to play. But as you say, unless people feel that the impact of this is impacting on them personally, we cannot change the attitudes that are there present.
Mr. Jayaratna, also let's talk a bit about the public sector and the attitude of the public sector in general. Recently I went to several government departments, and what I saw was a very lackadaisical attitude amongst all of those government departments. You go to the reception, you go to offices to get something done. The attitude is very negative and lackadaisical. So how are we to take the country forward if the government, the public sector lacks the drive and the motivation and the correct attitude to really do this?
How can you compare this with the private sector, where you find people having those qualities that you mentioned? It comes from the same set of people. It is how they are recruited, how they are trained, what values are embedded in them, what accountabilities they are placed upon, and what incentives are there to motivate them to perform. Now, in the public service, It's politicization. When a government comes in, they fill the cadres with their people to get their jobs having been given. They are not trained thereafter. There is no proper assessment of people. There is no proper incentive. Now we gave 10,000 rupee salary increase to all the people in the first budget, and that was hailed as the greatest return that this new government of the Yahapalane did for the people. Now certainly in my books, that is not a way, because that 10,000 rupees added to a pensionable salary is going to cost this country something that we cannot ill afford. What should have happened is, it should have been put into, okay, you are entitled to 10,000 rupees a month. You will be paid it in 6 monthly installments as an incentive payment. So people would have got their 10,000 into 12. No impact upon the pensions, and there would have been an assessment-based, performance-based pay. Now, these politicians' short-term thinking, without committing to get, these are the reasons what you find that lackadaisical performance that you...
So how do we correct this, Mr. Jayaratna? I mean, moving forward, how do we correct this?
Well, first of all, I think we need to have a set of people who are really committed, elected into leadership, who runs the way your company is run. There is a leader, there is a team comprising of group directors who set objectives, who assess what's happening, who take the corrective decisions, and who serve all the stakeholders in the way that they should be treated. So that is no difference between running a country and running a company. Unfortunately, these politicians have not, in my books, many of them have never been, I don't know, they all should go to management school again to learn how to, the coalition partners to work together is absolutely the same. If under any M&A or mergers and acquisitions theory anybody has learned, case studies, there are enough how they should get together, how they should agree the objectives, the vision, the values. These are all set by the leaders. To me, the blame rests with the leaders. Leaders have played politics, leaders have played nepotism, leaders have even played out the people's money for their progeny or for their power. With these conditions, this country is where it is.
Mr. Jayaratna, another one of the concerns is that Sri Lanka's youth, once it receives free education and university education perhaps, they migrate overseas and they just, come back for a holiday to maybe see Nurelia or Nilaveli Beach. And that has become a fast growing trend. The brain drain is massive. And some of the concerns that they have, which they speak of, is, Sri Lanka is a lost cause. Because Sri Lanka is run by individuals and not systems. There are no systems in place. How should we tackle that question? I mean, you're someone who stayed back in the country. You're a professional who remained in the country to serve the country. How would you respond to this criticism?
I think it's a chicken and egg situation. If we have sufficient jobs of high quality, which gives them the satisfaction and an adequate livelihood, I think the people will remain. But some of the conditions also require that the future, their children and their progeny will have a future. Unfortunately, when you do not see a future with politicians doing things which are for their benefit. Now, if you can see, the recent reports of cabinet responsibility or irresponsibility, when a cabinet minister comes and says he did not know that what was in the cabinet papers, he did not know that his son's company was receiving a contract. Now, these are fundamental requirements. So these are not people who should be elected into office. So I think we need the fundamental change. My point is, leadership must get into the hands of the right people, for which the people should be educated enough to do so, and the framework, systems and structures for doing that must be available.
But we have systems and structures in place, right? Is it not functioning properly? What really is wrong? What is it that we need to correct in this country?
Well, let's take the bond scam. After the 2015 bond scam, let us say the systems and structures of February 27th when that happened. How could it have repeated 2 days in the end of March 2016 if systems and structures were there and people were honest and there was leadership? Now, would this, if it had happened in your company or mine when we were running a business, who would be responsible? My shareholders would have held me responsible and I would have lost the job the first time. But if the first time they pardoned me, the second time I would have been taken to courts for the mistake that had been done, instead of which it was a cover-up of what really happened. But today again, we have been diverted about a house or payment for a house rather than look at what really happened to the money. We are not going to collect the money for a long, long time. So that's the point. Now, all the past the frauds, there has to be some kind of professional investigative mechanisms in place, led by people with commitment who should take this forward. I don't think the government and its leadership has real interests of pursuing, because they would want themselves to be excluded in the same way in the future.
Mr. Jayaratna, I'd like to keep this conversation very simple and accessible to the general public watching us as well. When we look at the ministers, the cabinet of ministers, for example, something that we see is whenever we try to contact them, if the general public were to should require to contact a minister or the ministry secretary for any purpose, they are not really contactable. The public accountability factor, the relationship between minister and the elected official and the general public is, there's a huge gap there. So once elected, that gap increases. And this is something that we see happening on a daily basis. How do we rectify this?
Well, I think one tool is available to us, which is the right to information. Thankfully, that bill got through with a few more things to worry about. If we have that properly used by the public, we can get a lot of information. Second one is, we must make all public servants and all private sector employees responsible for reporting of non-compliance with laws and regulations. Now, all accountants in this country and by the International Accounting Standards Board are required to report or do something about if you find that there was some non-compliance with the laws and regulations. Now, with this, take an example from the recent past that's been reported in the media. If somebody comes and puts millions of rupees into a cash safe and an accountant is aware of it, he is taking money from that and he's going and paying it. When he is aware that cash over a certain amount cannot be drawn and kept, every time a cash payment has been made, 9 months of 11 million paid to a bank should have realized, or 11 million paid for 9 months should have realized 9 suspicious transaction reports. Now, this accountant who did it, the bankers who received it, the ones who approved all these transactions should have done their professional duty and reported it. Then this issue would not have happened. If you declare your interests, if you declared your interests, if you are a cabinet minister before the cabinet, and the cabinet secretariat, like in UK, recorded it, upheld it, validated it, and people had a choice of doing reporting, then things would be very effective. Now, if you want to raise a point or a question in Parliament, you and I, we have to find an MP who's willing to raise it. Why should that be? The Ombudsman won't take it. the parliamentary privileges prevent them. Now this government's one of the main promises was to amend the Parliamentary Privileges Act and its implications so that the committee systems work, public can go there, public can question. Now where are all these promises? Now if you want to, the promises that were made in 2015, if they are implemented, were implemented with honesty, integrity of purpose by committed leaders, this country would be now on the way within the next, by 2020, to have become a leading development-oriented center of the whole of the Asian region. We have allowed our leaders to fool us. We have allowed our leaders to rob us of what the national resources are, and they have the gumption to get up and call themselves. We must all get together and name and shape. I'll give you just one example to end up. Let's take this housing business. Houses for the conflict affected people. They were trying to foster a 65,000 houses imported from abroad, which the affected people did not want, which was going to cost this country, the earth, nearly 40% more than what it would have cost to build it here, and in foreign exchange with a payment period over 10 years, which would have meant that with 65,000 houses we could have done 110,000 houses at the local cost. But an attempt was made continuously by interested parties to pass this contract. What happened to the professionals in these professional committees? The CCEM, all these things were petitioned. But what I'm saying, ultimately, thanks to the media, thanks to the civil society, thanks to the political leaders of the region where the affected people were, and the people, now looks like they have given up. They have given 6,000 houses to satisfy whatever their commitments, and now they are getting back. So this shows that if where the public, the citizens, the media, the leaders at base level and civil society get together, we can hold the government to account to perform with Yahapalane.
My final question to you. Mr. Jayaratne, do you think we have hope for Sri Lanka, given the present white-collar crime incidents, fraud, corruption that is being brought before the public? Do you think we can still have hope? And if so, what exactly do we need to do?
We have to have hope. We have to do those four people, the citizens, the media, civil society and professionals have to get together and hold the people to account. We must have constitutional changes where we have a power of recall. If anybody who has been found guilty of moral turpitude, they should immediately lose, if they are determined by a court, they should lose all their rights and immediately be recalled. The Right to Information Act must give, whistleblowers must start working. We must insist on accountability, and performance must be evaluated in Parliament, publicly, and where people failed. And if some justification must be there. Now look at the justification. There are people without houses, there are people who have suffered from the drought, from everything else, but we are importing vehicles by the billions to satisfy ministers. Now the attitudes people must express. What is the heavenly need, other than the president and maybe the prime minister, to have convoys of people following? I mean, doesn't the chairman of this company, who's a ransomable individual, if with his abilities and his wealth, he goes about in a normal car without four gun-tooting people in. People must object. Now this is where people power, and I think you are doing a great job, but your responsibilities are yet more, I would say, lead us on as people, as Moses did. Lead the people, media and young people like you should be doing it.
Mr. Chandra Jayaratne, thank you very much for joining us on this edition of Newsline. We'll see you again tomorrow.
Thanks, Sonal.